Hi, I'm Daniel Lucas,
And this is Nick, the Doctor of Digital.
and welcome to Sex 101. Sex 101 is created to empower our sexes and relationships. Another week, another great episode. When wellness is not enough, the hidden crisis in 2025 sex culture.
This is Beyond Wellness to Covenant, a critical engagement with the article Redefining Pleasure, exploring sexual wellness trends in 2025 through the lens of early Christian wisdom and contemporary psychology. This episode examines the emerging sexual wellness trends of 2025, a landscape dominated by smart technology, individualized self-care, and radical inclusivity. We're responding to an article that positions these trends as empowerments for modern women juggling careers, motherhood, and self care. While these developments promise liberation and fulfillment, we'll explore how they often deliver the opposite, a commodified, isolated, and ultimately unsatisfying approach to intimacy. The ancient wisdom of covenant sexuality offers not a retreat to repression, but a path toward the deep, secure, and transformative intimacy that contemporary wellness culture promises but cannot deliver.
The article opens with enthusiasm about smart products, app connected devices, remote control capabilities, and technology that promises to enhance intimacy and pleasure. What is your initial read on this technological turn in the sexual space, Mr. Beck?
It's revealing that the article leads with innovation in products because it immediately signals where contemporary culture locates the solution to sexual dissatisfaction, external optimization rather than internal transformation. The language is telling. These devices, quote, put power back in women's hands and prioritize design, discretion, and functionality. This is the vocabulary of consumer electronics, not relational intimacy. We're being told that better sex comes from better gadgets, which fundamentally reframes sexuality as a technical problem requiring a technological solution. But here's the deeper issue. This represents a category error about the nature of sexual intimacy itself. The biblical tradition from Genesis forward understands sexuality as fundamentally relational and covenantal. The one flesh union described in Genesis 2:24 isn't a transaction or an experience to be optimized. It's a mysterious unification of two persons into a new reality. The mechanism of that union isn't an external technique, but internal surrender, the complete vulnerable gift of self to the other within the safety of permanent commitment. When Jesus references this text in Matthew 19:5 through 6, he emphasizes the divine authorship of this union. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate. The technology of covenant sexuality is covenant itself, the binding promise that creates the secure space for total vulnerability. The early church fathers were acutely aware of how external factors could distort this intimacy. Clement of Alexandria, writing in the late second century, critiqued the luxury culture of his time that treated physical pleasure as an end in itself rather than as gift embodied within larger goods like virtue and relational commitment. In his Pedagogicus, the instructor, he argued that Christians should pursue simplicity and purposefulness, reflecting the surrounding culture's obsession with sensory optimization. For Clement, the pursuit of maximum pleasure through external means inevitably deforms the soul, training it in towards endless consumption rather than faithful commitment. When a couple introduces technology to enhance their bond, that subtle shift the locus of intimacy from the relationship itself to the device, from the covenantal us to the optimized it. Contemporary attachment research powerfully validates this ancient wisdom. Dr. Sue Johnson's emotionally focused therapy demonstrates that long term sexual and relational satisfaction is fundamentally about secure attachment, the deep emotional certainty that your partner is reliably available and responsive. This security isn't created by enhanced sensation, but by consistent emotional presence. The neurochemistry of pain bonding, pair bonding, particularly oxytocin and vasopressin release, is robustly triggered not by physical stimulation alone, but by the combination of physical intimacy and emotional security. The tragic irony of the smart products trend is that by focusing attention on optimized sensation, it actually undermines the emotional co regulation and mutual vulnerability that produce the deepest pleasure. The couple begins to rely on the device rather than on each other, subtly eroding the very intimacy they're trying to enhance. Moreover, this technological mediation introduces what we might call the tyranny of optimization. When there's always a better device, a more advanced feature, or an innovation to try, satisfaction becomes perpetually elusive. Relationship researchers have documented a phenomenon called maximizing versus satisficing. Maximizers who constantly seek the optimal choice report lower satisfaction than satisficers who choose good enough. The smart products tend couples to be maximizers in the bedroom, constantly wondering if there's a better experience just or one purchase away. This is the opposite of covenant satisfaction, which finds sufficiency in the person of the beloved, not in the perfection of the experience. In conclusion, the technological enhancement of intimacy fundamentally misunderstands the nature of sexual satisfaction, which is rooted not in optimized sensation, but in secure attachment in covenantal commitment, a truth affirmed by both ancient Christian wisdom and contemporary attachment science.
Mr. Meg, the article frames sexual wellness as an indulgent, nurturing experience and position is an essential self care. Is there something wrong with viewing pleasure as a self care, or is the traditional view inherently anti pleasure?
This requires careful nuance because the Christian tradition is absolutely not anti pleasure. In fact, Christianity affirms the goodness of the body and pleasure in ways that many ancient philosophies do not. The question isn't whether pleasure is good, it is, but rather what makes pleasure truly satisfying and sustainable. The problem with the sexual wellness as self care framing is that it isolates pleasure from its proper context, the mutual covenantal relationship. Consider the Song of Solomon, one of the most erotic texts in world literature. It's a celebration of desire, physical beauty, and sensual pleasure. But notice that the pleasure is always relational. The lovers delight in each other. I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine. The pleasure isn't primarily about the self, but about the presence and gift of the other. The woman's beauty delights the man, but the man's love awakens the woman. The pleasure becomes meaningful precisely because it's shared within a relationship characterized by exclusive devotion and mutual longing. This is pleasure in its proper theological or end context, ordered toward the end or good of the union. The modern self-care formulation inverts this. When the article describes sexual wellness products like lubricants, massage oils, and calming intimacy candles as tools for an indulgent, nurturing experience, the implicit subject is the autonomous self. The pleasure is on what brings me joy, on reclaiming time and space for myself. This language of reclamation to suggest that relationship demands are an imposition from which the self must periodically escape. But this is precisely what covenant marriage rejects, the notion that there is an autonomous self that exists before and apart from the marital union. Augustine of Hippo, in his treatise on the good of marriage, identified three goods of marriage: fidelity, offspring, and sacramental bond. Pleasure was certainly affirmed, but it was subordinated to these higher goods. Augustine's concern was what he called concupiscence, the disordered desire that seeks its own gratification rather than the good of the other. When pleasure becomes the highest good, when it becomes self care, it inevitably becomes tyrannical, consuming the very relational structures that give it lasting meaning. The pleasure of marriage for Augustine is properly understood as the seal and celebration of the covenantal bond, not as an end in itself. The Stoic philosophers, whose wisdom significantly influenced early Christianity, understood that true freedom comes not from indulging desires, but from mastering them. Epictetus taught that the person who is enslaved to pleasure can never be truly free because they are constantly at the mercy of their appetites. While Christianity doesn't embrace the Stoic rejection of pleasure, it retains this crucial insight. Discipline and direction are necessary for human flourishing. Sexual self care that habitually prioritizes solo pleasure and individual satisfaction trains the soul in exactly the wrong direction towards autonomy rather than communion. Contemporary psychological research on marriage validates this concern. Dr. Scott Stanley's work on commitment demonstrates that relationship success is predicted not by individual satisfaction, but by dedication, the willingness to sacrifice personal preferences for the good of the relationship. His research shows that couples who maintain strong usness, reviewing themselves as a unit rather than as two individuals, report higher satisfaction over time. A self care practice that encourages the individual to reclaim time and space for themselves in the sexual domain risks undermining this crucial usness. The message becomes my needs versus our bond rather than my fulfillment through our bond. Studies on unilateral decision making in relationships consistently show that when one partner makes decisions, including sexual decisions based primarily on personal preference rather than mutual consideration, relationship satisfaction declines for both partners. The truest form of sexual self care within covenant is the care taken to protect and nurture the bond itself, often through acts of deference, patience, and other centered attention that contemporary self care culture would view as self betrayal, but which actually produces the deepest long term satisfaction. In conclusion, while pleasure is indeed good and important, the isolation of pleasure from its covenantal context, its redefinition as individualized self care, ultimately undermines the relational conditions that make pleasure most meaningful and sustainable, a concern validated both by Augustine theology and contemporary commitment research.
Mr. Meg, the article celebrates the destigmatizing or conversations around pleasure through social media, podcasts, and online communities. Is it not breaking down shame inherently positive? What is your concern about this normalization trend?
The impulse to alleviate toxic shame, the kind that isolates people in secrecy and self loathing, is genuinely good and deeply Christian. The early church was revolutionary in its treatment of sexual sinners. Jesus' interaction with the woman caught in adultery, John 8, demonstrates both unflinching moral clarity and radical compassion. The church has always sought to remove false shame, the condemnation of our own created nature and embodied existence. But we must distinguish carefully between destigmatization and what I call decontextualization. Shame serves multiple functions in human psychology and morality. Toxic shame condemns the person. Healthy shame protects sacred boundaries. The Greeks had a concept called eidos, the combination of modesty, reverence, and shame that they viewed as essential for civilized life. It wasn't about self hatred, but about recognizing that some things are too precious for public consumption. The ancient wisdom traditions understood that privacy isn't the enemy of health, it's the guardian of intimacy. Tertullian, writing in the late second and early third centuries, championed virtues that protected both the dignity of the body and the integrity of the marital bond. In his treatise on modesty, he argued that the privacy of sexual intimacy wasn't repressive but protective. When something is shared by everyone, it loses its capacity to create exclusive bonding with anyone. The marital bed, in Tertullian's framework, is a sanctuary precisely because it's bounded, protected from the gaze and judgment of the world. This privacy isn't shame, it's reverence. The article celebrates that women are sharing their stories, asking questions, and discovering that their experiences are more universal than they thought. But notice what's happening here. The most intimate aspects of marital sexuality are being translated into public content, a topic for a quick hit podcast segment or a trending hashtag. This fundamentally alters the nature of intimacy, the sacred space of the marriage bed, which should be known only to two people who share it, becomes material for public consumption and comparison. The exclusive bond that defines us against them begins to erode. The book of Proverbs repeatedly warns about the dangers of unguarded speech. Proverbs 11:13 cautions, whoever goes about slandering reveals secrets, but he who is trustworthy in spirit keeps a thing covered. The wisdom literature understands that discretion, knowing what to keep private, is essential for maintaining trust. When intimate details are routinely shared with anonymous thousands, the exclusivity that creates security is compromised. Your spouse is no longer the sole keeper of your most vulnerable self. Psychological research on attachment and relationship security strongly supports this ancient wisdom. John Bowlby's attachment theory demonstrates that secure bonding requires clear boundaries between the couple and the outside world. The relationship creates a secure base precisely because it's protected space when vulnerability is safe. Dr. Sue Johnson's work in emotionally focused therapy emphasizes that emotional safety, knowing that your innermost experiences are held in confidence, is the foundation of secure attachment. When those experiences become podcast content, that safety is fundamentally compromised. Moreover, the social media normalization of intimacy introduces the corrosive force of social comparison into the bedroom. Research demonstrates that social comparison, measuring your life against curated presentations of others' lives, is a primary driver of anxiety and dissatisfaction in the social media age. When sexual experiences are publicly discussed and implicitly compared, couples are encouraged to evaluate their own intimacy against these often unrealistic standards. This doesn't empower, it creates perpetual inadequacy. The couple begins to wonder, are we normal? Are we doing it right? Should we be experiencing what they're experiencing? The secure containment of the marital bond is replaced by anxious comparison with an infinite peer group. The deepest support for sexual struggles doesn't come from anonymous online communities, but from the intimate, trustworthy, covenanted partner, and perhaps from a wise, discreet counselor or spiritual director bound by confidentiality. The early church practiced confession as a private, sacred space, not a public performance. The healing came from the safety of the confessional, not from broadcast. In conclusion, while the alleviation of toxic shame is essential, the social media driven normalization of intimate discussions risks stripping sexuality of its sacred privacy and exclusive character, undermining the very relational security that makes profound intimacy possible, a concern deeply rooted in both biblical wisdom and attachment theory.
Mr. Mick, the article promises that sexual wellness can be rapidly integrated into daily life, products that are approachable and easy to integrate, experiences that are immediately accessible. How does these compare to a traditional understanding of sexual fulfillment as something that unfolds over time?
This is perhaps the most fundamental difference between the wellness paradigm and the covenantal paradigm. They're completely different relationships to time. The sexual wellness movement operates on the logic of consumer culture: identify a need, purchase a solution, experience immediate improvement. It's transactional and immediate. The covenantal framework operates on an entirely different temporal logic: eschatological patience or end patience. True relational and sexual fulfillment is understood not as an immediate state to be achieved, but as a lifelong journey to be walked, a process of mutual formation that takes decades. The classical philosophical tradition understood this deeply. Plato's dialogues consistently emphasized the necessity of reason governing appetite. The wise person, for Plato, is distinguished by the capacity to delay gratification, to recognize that the highest goods require patience and discipline. This philosophical temperance was fully integrated into Christian thought. The Christians thought highly of that self control, soundness of mind as a cardinal virtue. This wasn't puritanical repression, it was recognition that the best things in life cannot be rushed. The Christian understanding of marriage is fundamentally teleological and eschatological. That is, the end is what is important. Marriage isn't simply a present arrangement, but a journey towards perfection in love, a journey that mirrors the soul's journey toward God. John Chrysostom, in his homilies on Ephesians, described marriage as a school of love where spouses learn to bear with each other's failings, to forgive repeatedly, to sacrifice consistently. For Chrysostom, the purpose of marriage was not primarily pleasure, but mutual sanctification, the slow, often painful process of being formed into people capable of Christ like love. The sexual dimension of marriage participates in this sanctification. It requires the discipline of fidelity, the patience to learn each other deeply over many years, and the willingness to remain present through seasons of difficulty or diminished desire. The long view of sexual satisfaction stands in stark contrast to the integrated into daily life approach of wellness culture. The covenant doesn't promise immediate fulfillment, it promises ultimate fulfillment achieved through persistent faithfulness. There will be seasons of disconnect, frustration, and even resentment. The covenant's genius is that it removes the exit option, forcing the couple to do the difficult work of repair and reconnection rather than seeking satisfaction elsewhere. Psychological research on long term relationships powerfully affirms this patient approach. The famous marshmallow test studies demonstrated that the capacity to delay gratification in childhood predicts better outcomes across virtually every dimension of adult life, including relationship stability and satisfaction. In relational terms, this translates into what researchers call dedication commitment. Dr. Scott Stanley's work distinguishes between couples who slide into deeper commitment, passively drifting without clear decisions, and couples who decide, making intentional commitments with clear boundaries. His research consistently shows that deciders experience greater stability and satisfaction over time. The covenant is the ultimate deciding mechanism. It's an irrevocable decision that creates a bounded space where deep intimacy can slowly develop. The neurobiological research on pair bonding also validates this long term view. Dr. Helen Fisher's work on the stages of love, lust, attraction, and attachment shows that while the first two stages are intense and rapid, the third stage, attachment, is characterized by calm, stable bonding that deepens over years and even decades. This attachment phase, marked by elevated oxytocin and vasopressin, is where the deepest satisfaction resides, but it requires time and consistent presence to develop fully. The wellness model, with its focus on immediate enhancement and optimization, risks keeping couples perpetually in the lust and attraction phases, never allowing the slower, deeper attachment to fully mature. There is also the question of realistic expectations. The covenant model is honest about difficulty. It doesn't promise that sex will always be exciting or that desire will remain constant. It promises instead that commitment will outlast the fluctuations of feeling, and that this very persistence creates conditions for a depth of intimacy unavailable to those who exit when excitement fades. Research on long term married couples shows that sexual satisfaction often follows a U shaped curve, high in the early years, declining in the middle years, especially with young children, and often rising again in later years for couples who remain committed. The covenant permits couples to endure the valley, knowing that fidelity through difficulty produces a deeper union on the other side. In conclusion, the sexual wellness movement's promise of immediate, easily integrated improvement fundamentally misunderstands the temporal nature of deep satisfaction, which is achieved not through rapid optimization, but through patient, persistent fidelity over decades, a truth affirmed by both Christian eschatological vision and longitudinal relationship research.
The article advocates for holistic sexual health that addresses physical, emotional, and mental health as interconnected factors, including mindfulness, body positive affirmations, and attention to nutrition and exercise. This sounds comprehensive and positive. How does the Christian holistic view differ, Mr. Mike?
This is the most sophisticated and seductive aspect of the article because it appropriates traditionally Christian language, holism, integration, the interconnection of body and soul, but redirects it towards a fundamentally different end. Both frameworks affirm holism, but they diverge completely on the question: holism for what purpose? Integration toward what goal? The modern therapeutic model, as embodied in this article, pursues holistic integration for the sake of individual optimization and self actualization. The goal is a self that is maximally healthy, sexually satisfied, and affirming of its own needs and desires. The self is the project. The relationship serves the self. Notice the article's recommendations. Mindfulness practices and body positive affirmations focused on self acceptance and pleasure. The direction of attention is inward. How does my body feel? What do I need? The Christian holistic vision is fundamentally different. The goal isn't individual optimization, but relational communion and ultimately the being united with God through capable and being capable of divine love. The self isn't the project, the covenant relationship is the project, and the self is transformed through it. Gregory of Nyssa, one of the great Cappadocian fathers, emphasized that human beings are created in the imago Dei, the image of God. And this image is realized precisely through the harmonious integration of body and soul in service of love. For Gregory, the body isn't a prison or obstacle, as some Gnostics taught, but an integral part of the person, created good and destined for resurrection. This means that sexual acts carry immense dignity and significance. They must reflect the internal destiny of the whole person. In 1 Corinthians 6:19 through 20, Paul writes, "Do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, which you have from God? You are not your own, for you were bought with a price. So glorify God in your body." This isn't body shaming, it's body exalting. The body is so important, so sacred, that it must be treated as a temple, a place where God dwells. Sexual acts, therefore, must honor this sacred character. They must be acts of covenantal love, not mere pleasure or self care. The practical difference between these two holisms is profound. The article recommends mindfulness and affirmations focused on self acceptance. The Christian tradition recommends mindfulness of the other and affirmations of covenantal fidelity. Instead of, my body is good and deserves pleasure, the Christian affirmation is, my body is a gift I offer to my spouse in total, exclusive, irrevocable love. The focus shifts from the self experience to the relationship's integrity. This is what theologians call sacramental anthropology. The body and its acts are understood as signs of a greater reality. Sexual union within marriage is a sacramental sign. It makes visible and real the invisible reality of total self gift. This is why the marriage bed is sacred, not because sex is dirty and needs sanctifying, but because it's already holy, a participation in divine love. The question isn't, how can I optimize my sexual experience, but how can our sexual union more fully embody our covenantal promise? Aristotle's concept of virtue as the mean between extremes, developed much later by Thomas Aquinas into a comprehensive Christian ethics, is relevant here. Our desires and bodily needs are good, but they must be rightly ordered. They become destructive when they become tyrannical, when they dominate rather than serve the whole person. Christian sexual ethics locates the ordering principle not within the self's desires, but within the covenantal structure established by God. True holistic health means body, mind, and soul align not with individual appetite, but with the demands of faithful, fruitful, forever love. Contemporary relationship research validates this other centered approach. Dr. John Gottman's extensive studies on marital quality show that lasting satisfaction is predicted not by personal fulfillment, but by consistent patterns of turning toward the partner's bids for connection. Gottman's famous 5-to-1 ratio, 5 positive interactions for every negative one, demonstrates that relationship health is built on and through accumulated small acts of attention and care for the other, not through self focused optimization. When spouses intentionally direct their energy towards serving each other, they create the conditions for their own deepest flourishing, but it comes as a byproduct of other centeredness, not as a direct goal of self focus. Research on pro social behavior consistently demonstrates that acts of service and sacrifice for others produce greater long term happiness than self indulgent activities. The Christian sexual ethic is, at its core, a sustained practice of pro social behavior within the most intimate relationship, a practice that paradoxically produces the fulfillment that self focused wellness promises but cannot deliver. In conclusion, while both frameworks embrace holism, they pursue radically different goals. The modern therapeutic model seeks individual optimization through self focus, while the Christian covenantal model seeks a relational communion and personal transformation through other centered love, an approach strongly validated by Gottman's research and the psychology of pro social behavior.
The article concludes with the claim that modern women are empowered, mindful, independent, loving, and fearless, and states definitively that pleasure is power. For listeners attracted to this vision of empowerment, how do we present covenant sexuality as a genuinely empowering rather than restrictive, Mr. May?
This is the crucial question because empowerment is the ultimate value in contemporary culture. The article defines empowerment as autonomy, the power to define your own reality, fulfill your own desires, and remain independent. This is what philosopher Charles Taylor calls the ethics of authenticity, the belief that fulfillment comes from being true to your inner self without external constraint. It's a low risk definition of power because it always preserves exit options. You remain free to leave when difficulty arrives. The covenantal framework offers a radically different and infinitely more profound definition of power, the power of irrevocable commitment, costly love, and complete vulnerability without self protection. This is high risk power. It's the power to bind yourself to another person's good permanently without escape clauses. When the article says pleasure is power, it means that transient, self directed sensation is power. The Christian response is that enduring, self sacrificial love is the highest power. True fearlessness should seek isn't the fearlessness to break taboos or define on our own terms. It's the fearlessness to commit without an exit strategy, to say, I'm yours completely and forever, and mean it. It is both terrifying and liberating in ways that autonomous self determination can never achieve. Covenant commitment is the true source of relational power for several reasons. First, it conquers attachment anxiety. The irrevocable nature of the covenant provides what attachment researchers call a secure base, the emotional certainty that your partner will be there, even when things are difficult, even when you're not at your best. This security is the foundation of adult attachment. Dr. Sue Johnson's research in emotionally focused therapy demonstrates that when individuals know their partner is predictably and unconditionally available, they gain the emotional freedom to take risks, pursue goals, and engage the world with confidence. The paradox is that the restriction of options, I cannot leave, actually produces psychological freedom. I can be fully myself. The fearlessness the article seeks is genuinely achieved when love is seen as a permanent promise rather than a conditional arrangement. Second, it creates psychological resilience. A marriage built on the New Testament model of agape love, love as choice, will, and sacrificial service rather than emotion or attraction, is uniquely equipped to weather the inevitable crises of life together. Ephesians 5:25 commands, "Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her." This is love as an intentional, costly action. Dr. Stanley's research on dedication and commitment shows that relationships thrive when rooted in positive dedication to the relationship's future rather than negative constraint, staying only because leaving is difficult. The covenant provides both the positive choice to dedicate oneself completely, plus the constraint that removes the exit option. This combination creates extraordinary motivational power to work through difficulty rather than escape from it. Third, it honors the full dignity of the person. The Christian sexual ethic, particularly as articulated by Augustine and Chrysostom, view this body as sacred, the temple of the Holy Spirit, destined for resurrection. Sexual acts within covenant honor the whole person, body, soul, and eternal destiny. This is genuine empowerment, treating your own and your partner's sexuality not as a recreational resource to be optimized, but as a sacred gift to be honored. The power of covenant is the power to say, you are enough, and I am here forever, and to receive that same promise in return. This mutual declaration is the most potent affirmation available in human relationships. It transcends any technological enhancement or therapeutic affirmation because it comes from the person who knows you fully and chooses you most completely. Fourth, it provides intergenerational continuity and social stability. The article focuses entirely on an individual empowerment, but covenant marriage situates individual flourishing within larger contexts, family, community, and society. The exclusive pair bond is the foundation of stable families, where the foundation of stable societies. Research consistently shows that children thrive best in stable two parent families characterized by high commitment and low conflict. The covenant's restriction, limiting sexual intimacy to one permanent partner, produces enormous social goods that benefit not just the couple, but their children, extended family, and broader community. This is power at the civilizational level, not just the individual level. The modern definition of empowerment, autonomous self determination, actually produces a form of powerlessness, the perpetual need to assert and defend the self, the anxiety of unlimited options, the loneliness of independence. The covenantal definition produces a different kind of power, the security of being fully known and fully loved, the strength that comes from irrevocable commitment, the freedom that paradoxically emerges from willing constraint. In conclusion, while contemporary wellness culture offers the surface appeal of autonomous empowerment through self defined pleasure, the covenantal framework provides a deeper, more durable form of power rooted in the fearless vulnerability of irrevocable commitment, a form of empowerment that conquers attachment anxiety, builds psychological resistance, and creates the unshakable security necessary for true human flourishing.
To bring this together, if the sexual wellness movement aims at a wellness and empowerment in this life, what is the ultimate goal of a con- covenantal framework, Mr. Mac? What is the single most important lesson our listeners should take away about finding true lasting satisfaction?
The sexual wellness movement, despite all its sophisticated language about holism and empowerment, remains fundamentally focused on imminent goods, wellness, pleasure, empowerment, and satisfaction in this life alone. It's a philosophy of the horizontal, better experiences, better products, better self understanding. These aren't bad goals, but they're insufficient because they lack transcendence. The ultimate goal of the covenantal framework is holiness in the Eastern Christian tradition. This means becoming the kind of person capable of divine love, love that is completely self giving, utterly faithful, purely other centered. Sexual intimacy without covenant participates in this transformation. It's a school where we learn to die to our autonomous self and rise to our relational self, to become people who can say, your good is my good, and mean it completely. The single most important lesson is this: stop viewing your partner and your relationship as sources of personal fulfillment and start viewing yourself as the source of your partner's security and well being. This is a complete inversion of the wellness paradigm. The question isn't, what does this relationship do for me, but what does my faithfulness do for the other? When you orient yourself towards being your partner's secure base, their unfailing source of safety, acceptance, and love, you are embodying the covenant. And here's the paradox that psychology and theology both affirm: this act of radical other centeredness produces the deepest satisfaction for yourself. It's indirect, but it's powerful. Research on pro social behavior, acts of kindness, service, and sacrifice for others consistently shows that these are far stronger predictors of long term happiness and life satisfaction than self indulgent activities. The Christian sexual ethic is the most profound form of relational pro social behavior imaginable, the daily choice to honor, serve, and remain faithful to one person for a lifetime. This persistent other centeredness forms you into someone completely capable of deep love, and that capacity is itself the highest human achievement. The covenantal vision doesn't promise that sex will always be ecstatic or that marriage will always be easy. It promises something better: that your faithfulness will transform you into someone capable of permanent love, and that this transformation is the path to ultimate joy. The temporary fluctuations of pleasure and satisfaction become less important than the permanent reality of covenant love. In a culture that offers endless options, immediate gratification, and autonomous self determination, the covenant offers something countercultural and genuinely radical: the power of irrevocable commitment, the freedom of willing restriction, and the joy of becoming through patient, costly, persistent love, the kind of person who reflects divine love itself. In conclusion, the path to true sexual and relational satisfaction lies not in pursuing wellness through products, self care, or autonomous empowerment, but in embracing the transformative power of covenant commitment, a commitment that paradoxically produces the fulfillment, security, and deep joy that wellness culture promises but cannot deliver, because only self transcendent love can satisfy the human heart's deepest longings.
Mr. Mick, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. People, when wellness is not enough, the hidden crisis in 2025 sex culture express the tension between society obsessed with health and self optimization and the deeper struggles people face in intimacy, desire, and connection. Mr. Mick, would you like to plug in something?
Thank you so much. Write the book, grow the business. Connect with me on LinkedIn. GMIC, the Doctor of Digital Smith, PhD. Also listen to the Doctor of Digital podcast and pick up a couple volumes I have on Amazon. That is On Track, Ian Hunter, and Burning America.
Yes, people, let's about Mr. Mick. The doctor did it so. And please do listen to our daily podcast, Mental Health 101. Mental Health 101 is great to empower our mental health awareness. So, Mr. Mick, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, my friend. Until next time, Deus Vol.
More to come, people. See you soon.